Welcome to Mercy Minutes, our video pilgrimage for the Jubilee Year of Mercy. Today, we are speaking about the spiritual works of mercy, counseling the doubtful, instructing the ignorant, and admonishing the sinner. I'm here with Bishop Guglielmone. Bishop, welcome.
Thank you, Michael.
A couple of these spiritual works of mercy sound a little bit pejorative, or like we're speaking down to people. Is that really how they're intended? And is that how we're supposed to understand them?
Okay, well, I must admit that's the first time I've ever heard them portrayed that way. I guess if you look at them and simply look at the words, you might say, yeah, there's some possibility of interpreting them that way, but I don't see that at all. Maybe the use of the word ignorant might be a difficulty, or admonishing a sinner, but those are realities. Ignorance is simply the lack of appropriate information on something, and in terms of a sinner, my goodness, are we not all sinners? And I think that it's important for us to recognize that we travel this journey of life together. And there are times when we are in a position perhaps to have more knowledge about something than someone else might have. And obviously, when that is the case, we're called by this spiritual work of mercy to instruct, to help people come to an understanding of an appropriate way to respond to God's grace. That doesn't make us any better than anybody else, because there are going to be times when other people should be doing that for us, because none of us really has the whole picture, pulled together. And I think the same thing is true in terms of sin. I mean, there are times when perhaps we've even overcome a certain sinful attitude, and we might have some very good advice for someone in helping them to overcome perhaps that same sin.
I think in a lot of ways it's good to think about these in terms of maybe in terms of the verbs in there, advising, instructing, correcting. What role in those things, advising, instructing, correcting, does listening play?
Oh my goodness, the most important of roles. That's probably one of the difficulties I think we experience in contemporary society, is that there are many people who really don't listen very well. And if we are going to instruct people, admonish people, help them along in their journey, we have to have a good understanding of where they're at. I always remember when I was teaching, I was a public school teacher, for 5 years before I entered priesthood. One of the things that was absolutely essential in my role as a teacher, in my role of trying to instruct young people in a certain subject area, is I had to have an understanding of where they were, and I had to be able to listen to them. And of course, in teaching, you do that listening in a lot of ways. Sometimes, teachers give tests or quizzes, not necessarily for just, evaluating the student, but to get a sense of where are they at, how much do they understand. So you listen through the printed word. If you gave, teachers would give a quiz, or in our conversations with people, to find out where they are, we have to be able to listen. You can't advise someone if you don't know what it is they're dealing with.
When we talk about counseling the doubtful, I like to think of doubt as something that's not exactly the opposite of faith. Rather, doubt can be a moment that leads to a greater and a deeper faith. How are doubt and faith related?
Well, I think they're very much related, because faith means that we accept on a certain level what we can't fully understand or explain. But we accept it based on the word of the one who shares whatever that revelation is with us. But there are times when we think and reflect upon what we have heard, what we have experienced, and we question, is this really so? And in questioning, I think what happens is it causes us to reflect ever more deeply on the reality of the situation. So when we doubt, when we question, I think it ultimately leads us to a deeper appreciation of what it is we might question. Because if we are people of faith, and certainly we are, we wouldn't be here talking here if that wasn't the case. We do have a certain sense of the presence of God in our lives, and we do have a certain trust in the revelation that has come to us, through Jesus Christ. And when we question it, I think it causes us to go deeper and deeper and deeper.
When we talk about instructing and correcting, or the classical way of saying admonishing
Yes.
someone, both of those things are often things that we should do delicately.
Oh, yes.
How do we know when it's time to instruct, and certainly when it's time to correct?
Yes. Well, I think the most obvious indication of that is when we know a certain understanding on the part of people is just obviously an error. I mean, it's kind of obvious, as we've been going through this election cycle here, and we've seen certain statements being made by candidates, not only for the presidential office, but in many different offices that people have been seeking. They make statements that are not correct. They're erroneous, and these errors can be documented very, very clearly. And when we see that as the case, we really have an obligation to come back and say, what you're saying is not completely accurate. We don't have to look at people and condemn them as though they were liars. People make mistakes. People come out with erroneous explanations for all kinds of reasons. But it doesn't mean we're helping them spiritually if we don't, in one way or another, try to correct the error. Of course, you do it gently. You do it with a sense of compassion. Just this morning I had Mass with a group of children, and I always love, when I celebrate Mass with school children in the homily, to have some sort of dialogue. And of course, there are times when the young people will respond to a question I might ask, and it's wrong. Well, what do you do with that? Do you certainly say, oh no, hey kid, you're so far off base, No. You just say, that's a good answer, but I think you're just a little bit off here. Let me try to help you come to a deeper understanding of what it is.
So you affirm something.
You affirm the person.
And you affirm the person, or you affirm the nugget of truth sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you also don't accept what might be false as true, because then you're not really teaching well.
Right. How can we do this, particularly when we're correcting someone? How can we do that with a sense of humility and love rather than pride and even disdain?
Well, I think that's important. There's that old adage, there, except for the grace of God, go I. We've all found ourselves in situations where we haven't been able to put it all together, and sometimes we travel a path that doesn't lead to truth or doesn't lead to goodness. So I think when we admonish or correct or instruct, it's important to recognize that we've been in that same situation, maybe not in that same circumstance, but certainly in a position of needing some sort of correction. And I think that remembering that and being aware of that is important in terms of the way we would deal with someone with whom we try to make a correction. Recognizing that what's the reason we do it? We don't do it to place ourselves on a higher level than the other person. We do it because we want to help that person come into deeper intimacy with God, to come closer to truth, to come closer to understanding, and that's our motivation.
And when we forget that, what we've done, we may have objectively corrected someone, but that no longer is a work of mercy.
Yeah, it is a possibility, being human, being sinners ourselves, that we fail. And of course, when that happens, an apology is usually required, if it's at all a possibility. If that's not a possibility, well, then I think reflection is important, and kind of a sense of self-correction, hoping that if we find ourselves in the situation again, we don't repeat the mistake.
All right. Well, thank you, Bishop, and thank all of you for joining us. And remember to go out there and counsel, instruct, and correct, but with humility. God bless you all.